The following recording has been created by Youth Out Loud and supported by Healthwatch Kingston. It has been funded by the Royal Borough of Kingston upon Thames Resilience Fund.
Welcome, I'm Scott from Youth Out Loud and Healthwatch Kingston. We're recording around our access to NHS and social care services for young people living with a disability. I'm joined by a member of YOL and Isabella, and also Josie. Josie, before we get into asking you questions, tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, your experience.
Sure.
Go for it.
So I'm Josie. I'm a former member of YOL. I also live with a disability, so I am a wheelchair user and I have a variety of disabilities which affect my walking and other physical problems.
Thank you. Obviously, Isabella, I know you've got some questions. I'll chip in every now and then, but Isabella, when you're ready, the first question for Josie.
So our first sort of section of questions is about physically going to healthcare appointments, both for and not for your condition, and how accessible that is in multiple ways. So the first question is, when you were diagnosed, was the information presented to you clearly and in a suitable format? So was it detailed enough and clear enough what the doctors were saying?
It was detailed enough in terms of what they knew. My disability is very rare, so it's sort of working stuff out all the time, and a lot of it's very theoretical. So for a while it was quite confusing to figure out everything that was going on and how that related to me.
And were the doctors clear about that kind of uncertainty, that there were things that they just genuinely didn't know?
They were clear about that uncertainty. It took a little bit of time myself to sort of make sense of everything and properly understand what's going on, and I'm still understanding today.
And I understand that at the time that you were diagnosed, you were still accessing children's services as you were a child at the time, but now you're an adult. So could you tell us a bit more about the transition process from going from children's services to adult services?
When I was diagnosed, I was 16, so I was sort of in that awkward middle stage. Accessing services and that transition was really difficult just because a couple of services I was with started putting you in adult services at 16, such as my physio. But my osteotherapist, they started adults at 18. So I'm sort of, for 2 years, I was sort of jumping services. It was a bit weird. I think even at the stage of my diagnosis, the very first meeting I had to diagnose me was with both my children's specialist and my adult specialist. So it was a little bit confusing and it was a bit all over the place for a while.
And do you think it would help to have a more consistent definition of who should be accessing children's services and adult services, just so that it's one transition rather than many that you make throughout your life?
Definitely. I think at the very minimum, every healthcare service across the NHS, because most of them for me were NHS, every healthcare service should have the same age that you transition. So you go all the way to adults or you're all the way in children's, and you're not in that weird stage in between. Because, for example, children's appointments at the physio, they were once every 6 weeks, and adult appointments with the physio were sort of as needed. So it really messed you up because in one area you're getting lots and lots of often appointments, and in another area you're not getting a single one for months and months and months.
That's really interesting to know, and I think helpful as well for people to know, because I didn't know that children's and adult services had differences in frequency of appointments and similar. And I think that definitely is something that's probably going to be quite a big change going between the services, especially if some of your services have more frequent appointments than others because of the different ages required to move up. So I think that's really helpful. So thank you for sharing that with us.
No problem. Generally, the main difference is because children's services get nearly all of the funding, which makes complete sense, but it's sort of you move from having appointments all the time to having basically no appointments. It's a bit of a weird transition, especially when you're sort of in that stage where I was when I had just been diagnosed. And I needed lots of appointments to sort of work out what was going on. I wasn't getting them often.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, it's not easy to know exactly what to do in that situation because I get why they give children's services a lot of funding. I don't know if having a sharp point of transition and the frequency changing almost overnight is necessarily a good solution. So it's definitely something interesting and worth thinking about a bit more, maybe. So the next question I have for you is if you needed to speak to someone about your condition outside of scheduled appointment times, have you been given a specialist doctor or contact that you could speak to about it, or would you have to see the GP instead? And if you've ever been in this situation, how did it go?
I wouldn't go to the GP first off because the thing with being in specialist appointments, all the GP does is refer you and then read the odd letter. So for people that are living with disabilities and are constantly being referred out to specialists, the GP doesn't have much of a clear idea of what's actually happening in the moment, which is understandable, but it can be difficult when that's meant to be the first point of contact, when they don't really know what's going on. So if you want to go and ask about a problem that you've had coming up several times, talking to the GP about I've had this issue and there's been some history of it. The GP doesn't know that history. So the GP wouldn't be the person I go to. I genuinely don't know because the thing about having lots of different specialists, you've got lots of different people. So it depends sort of what kind of issue you're looking at and what kind of thing you need support with.
And do you think it might help if everyone who sees multiple people for a health condition, do you think it'd be helpful if they had a designated main point of contact, or do you think that it's clear enough who to contact if you had any questions or anything?
I'd say it's not clear who to contact at all. I will say with the main neurology hospital I'm with at the moment, they've given me a specific nurse that I can get in contact with. And I think that it's really helpful having that one person. You sort of know, all right, if I have any questions about this thing, I can go to them.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a much better system because just knowing who to speak to takes a lot of stress off what's probably already a stressful situation if something arises and you need to speak to someone. And the last thing you want to do is to make it more stressful for someone. So that definitely seems like something that could be a really helpful thing. So the next question I have is when you access healthcare facilities, are they physically accessible for you, or have you had issues physically getting in and out or around buildings? And does this vary between services that you use as a result of your condition compared to services, more generic services like a GP or a dentist?
It definitely does vary because I'm with very specific types of doctors for my condition. So a lot of those are sort of right in the middle of town. So for here, they're right in the middle of London. And it's a long way to get to. And also the hospitals up there are very old. So you can see they've tried to make it accessible, but you've got a lot of like dodgy stair lifts that work sometimes, but not all the time, and things like that.
And how does that compare to services like the GP or the dentist that are used by everyone rather than just people who may have mobility issues?
The GP and the dentist, because they're services that everyone uses, they're much more local. So whereas it takes 2 to 3 hours to get to my neurologist, it takes 10 minutes to get to my dentist. And it's a lot more accessible because it's working with a smaller group of people. It's a lot more local. They're generally more modern.
That's really interesting to hear because I think I would have assumed it would have been the other way around, just out of your services are for people who might have additional challenges going around the building. So it's actually really interesting to hear that it's the other way around because
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem like it would be that way. And when you've had annual appointments or main appointments, if there's a frequency other than every year, are these local and communicated to you with plenty of time? And has it meant that you've had to miss work or social activities to make appointments?
I mainly have one appointment every year with my neurologist for my condition, and it's nowhere near local. It's in Queen Square off Tottenham Court Road, so it's right in the middle of London. It takes a long time to get there and a long time to get back as well. I often miss work because they do it on a working day. And for an afternoon appointment, I have had to leave work at midday quite a few times. So it can really disrupt work, school, whatever I'm doing.
And how were your school about you missing school to go to appointments? And similarly, how's your employer been about it? Have they been supportive or have they been more, why don't you just go on a weekend?
My previous employer was a bit more, why don't you go on a weekend? But my current employer is a specific disabled people's organisation. They work with disabled people, so they're really understanding, and I can get disability leave quite easily, so they're very understanding. In terms of school, they had to be understanding because there wasn't really a choice. I was very firm at that point. Well, this is my appointment. This is when it's happening, like it or lump it. So they kind of didn't have a choice in the situation.
Gosh, if there's anything if you wanted appointments at a different time, would that be possible? So, like, if something was coming up and they offered you an appointment, it's like, I don't really want to miss this thing, prom or whatever it might be.
So I've never really tried to move appointments because if I move an appointment, I might get another one, but it might be 8 months away.
Okay.
And that's not very good. So it's sort of drop everything and go to these appointments or else.
It's good to hear, though, that your current employer's been very supportive about it because things are just a lot easier in general when people are supportive. So that's really positive to hear.
They
So
are wonderful about it.
the next kind of section of questions is around life before and after being diagnosed, because I guess if you were diagnosed at 16, you've probably got more of a memory than some people would have of not having a diagnosis. So what support was offered to you before you had a formal diagnosis?
Not much is the answer. They found out about different bits of my disability at different times. I've got a chronic pain in my feet, so that's a pain that's always been there. And it's flared by walking, which can make it worse. So they offered pain clinics, but the only problem is like pain clinics are miles in town. And to get there, I'd have to do a lot of walking. So it kind of, for me, felt it to be to the object.
was going to say, that sounds like it kind of defeats the point.
Yeah, it kind of felt it defeated the object. I got a variety of recommendations, particularly for the pain, because that's what they found out about first. So that's what they focused on for a while. Got a variety of recommendations. Someone recommended I go horse riding. Now I've got problems with my balance and coordination. So horse riding is basically the worst thing I could possibly do to myself. So that was interesting. I didn't get masses of support. Before I was diagnosed, for a long time it was a bit, we know something's wrong, but we don't know what. So it was very hard for them to give support. The support that was there was sort of focusing on one area of my problem instead of focusing on the whole thing.
When somebody recommended horse riding, did they know about sort of the issues you had with balance as well?
They knew about all of it. A lot of people focused support before I was diagnosed on one part of my disability instead of the whole thing. When you know about the whole condition, you can easily go, right, horse riding, for example, not going to work. This one not going to work. This one not going to work.
Was that suggestion, do you think, based on the fact that they were just focused on the one thing, or was it because things weren't being communicated effectively between teams?
Say if things were being communicated effectively, because I was telling all of them.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, they said, oh, horse riding would help the pain, which is all well and good, but it's sort of, well, it doesn't help the balance and the coordination. So I sort of needed one thing that covered everything, and it felt like lots of people were focusing on different bits.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's something that is important. You can't just look at something as, oh, it's this collection of little small pieces, but let's look at each of these pieces individually. You do have to look at the bigger picture and look at everything together, because as you were saying, you can't treat one thing while making something else worse or doing something that you can't do as a result of another thing. So I think it's important that people do look at the full picture there. And how have things changed in terms of how doctors have treated you both before and after being diagnosed? Have they been able to do more or been taking things more seriously?
They've been able to do a bit more, sort of more concrete tests of things. I'd say the main difference in how it's been treated is in my family and friendship groups, and even teachers at the time. I was definitely being treated differently in the sense of before I was diagnosed, it was more treated as, well, she's a little bit weird and she'll grow out of it. And then once I was diagnosed, I was sort of more treated, okay, there's an actual problem here.
How did that make you feel?
It was a weird thing to get my head around, because I just got this diagnosis, and sort of I'd wanted one for years, but also no one knew what on earth my diagnosis meant. And then people were treating me so differently, and it just put me in a very weird headspace.
And when you say that people treated you differently, was that in a good way or a bad way or somewhere in between?
Generally in a good way. It was less focused on, this is a bit weird, but she'll grow out of it. More focused on, okay, there's an actual problem. It was less me sort of being the outcast weird kid, and more the fact that I was the disabled kid. That's an interesting thing to get your head around.
And I guess linking to the more social side of things, the next section of questions is more around the social side of having a disability. So not necessarily the medical, physical side of things. So have you tried getting a social care assessment? And if you did you meet the criteria? And if you didn't, did you manage to find a way to work around it or manage it?
I've never tried getting a social care assessment with my job role because I work so closely with people getting that support for people that have had social care assessments. I already know that I wouldn't pass the money side of things.
And do you think that you should qualify for it, or do you think that the restriction being in place is fair?
Generally, I feel the restriction is fair in my case, and I feel in a lot of other cases I see at work that, the restrictions should be different and there should be a bit of a change in the amount of savings someone can have. But for me, I feel it's fair.
And you touched a bit upon the people that you work with when accessing support workers. So I wanted to ask you if you're able to say, are there any common themes or recurring problems that people seem to be having accessing support workers that you've heard about?
I'd say yes. I work for a local charity, Rules, that sort of helps find people those personal assistants if they're getting support from the state to help pay for their care. And I, particularly in my role, focus on the recruitment side of things and getting more PAs who are willing to work with our clients. And I can say there's a really big fact in retention of these PAs because the role can be asking you to do a lot of really demanding things. You could be doing personal care, you can work with some severely mentally ill people who maybe aren't the kindest to you because they're so ill and in such a bad place mentally. And these people are getting paid, what, £14 an hour?
That's not fair. They should be paid more than that.
It's not fair at all. And I'd say that's the major issue with people sort of being retained in the role and getting people interested at first. A lot of the time, I would say, particularly at job fairs, you can see people sort of looking at our leaflets and instantly not being interested. Or instantly turning the role down as soon as they find out the pay rate, because the pay rate's just not high enough for these things.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it is very important to be aware of problems that people are facing. And it doesn't sound like people are being paid enough because it is a really important and probably really difficult job to have. So it's a shame that the pay doesn't seem to be reflecting that. So the final question that I have for you is about talking with people about your disability in society. Have you ever experienced any issues with talking about your disability as a result of the word spastic, either with friends, family, or even professionals such as medical workers, youth workers, or teachers?
Generally, I haven't experienced too much so for background. So the word spastic actually results to sort of how tight your muscles are. So it does have a medical background before it became an insult. I generally haven't found too much issue, although when I'm using online servers and things to communicate, often the word is banned or blocked from the system, which is slightly understandable, but also I can't properly explain my diagnosis because no one can use that word. And it's a very weird thing when part of your diagnosis is a word that you technically can't say on a lot of forums.
Do you think it would be overall a good idea if forums unban the word, or do you think they're right to keep it banned because of the other uses of it?
I think it's generally the word should be unbanned, I think, on most platforms, because the last time I've heard it used as an insult was in a song from the 90s. It's not the 90s. I've never heard anyone use it as an insult ever.
I was at school in the 90s, and it definitely, yeah, it was a 90s playground insult. I remember that. Um, I'm a little bit older than you guys. Yeah, so you don't hear it as much anymore, but it's still obviously you can't use it on forums where you're talking specifically
Yeah,
about your disability. Um, yeah, I think you're right. It definitely needs to be changed, especially if you're not hearing it as an insult, but also just limits how
yeah.
you can communicate.
It does need to be changed because even if it's not a specific question about my disability, for me, my diagnosis is a really key part of who I am. So
Mm.
often I'll introduce myself. Hello, my name is Josie. My diagnosis is hereditary spastic paraplegia, and it's a really big thing for me. It's a big part of who I am, so almost not being able to fully sort of talk about myself feels a bit odd.
I imagine it would. Hopefully, that as an insult, it stays, stays in the 90s. Isabel, do you have any other questions for Josie while we're here?
I don't have any other questions, but I just wanted to ask Josie before we sort of wrap up our conversation if there was anything that you wanted to share with us that perhaps we haven't covered in this conversation that you think would be useful for people to know.
I just would sort of add in that part of having disability also involves a lot of people assuming you can't do things, and therefore socially someone might decide that you can't go to a certain venue or do a certain thing, so I'll stop inviting you. And I just want to sort of let people know we do want to be invited, even if we can't do it, we want to be invited.
I think that's a really good point to end on because even if it's better to give someone an option to do something and then be able to make the decision themselves. Because the chances are well, not the chances are, you definitely know your disability better than other people do. So it's good to give you the option to decide, am I able to do this instead of someone else making that decision for you? But also, it's just nice to be invited to things, even if you can't do them, because it reminds you that people do care about you. And I think that's something that is important to forget about, but actually it is a really important thing to remember. So thank you for making that point. I think it's a really good one. And thank you also for all of your time this evening to talk to us about your experience. I mean, I've definitely learned a lot from it, and I hope that it'll be interesting for other young people to listen to, and hopefully they'll also have learned a lot from listening to it as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been really good to talk about it.
Youth Out Loud is a group of young people helping to improve our local health and care services. We work with Healthwatch Kingston and we use our voices to make health and care services better for young people.